Good cybersecurity relies on many factors to provide confidence and assurance that your data is safe and being used as expected. Authentication is one of these factors. It provides the mechanism for you to trust that someone is actually who they claim to be. To be effective, authentication needs to be robust and not cumbersome to use. When you've authenticated a user, you need to decide what they're permitted to do. Authorization grants each user a specific level of access to data and assets. As a rule, users should be given just enough permissions to access the resources they need. Suppose you're at the airport to catch a flight. Before you can get the boarding pass, you need to verify who you are. You present yourself and your passport, and if they match, you've passed the authentication process, and you're issued with the boarding pass. Now you've got a boarding pass, you can use it to board a plane. The boarding pass is the authorization, as it will only let you board the plane for the flight you've booked. If authentication is the key that opens the door, authorization decides where you can go and what you can see inside. After completing this module, you'll be able to describe authentication, describe some of the common authentication-based attacks, describe authorization security techniques, define authentication. Authentication is the process of proving that a person is who they say they are. When someone purchases an item with a credit card, they may be required to show an additional form of identification. This proves that they are the person whose name appears on the card. In this example, the user may show a driver's license that serves as a form of authentication and proves their ID. When you want to access a computer or device, you'll encounter the same type of authentication. You may get asked to enter a username and password. The username states who you are, but by itself isn't enough to grant you access. When combined with the password, which only that user should know, it allows access to your systems. The username and password are a form of authentication. Strong authentication methods are essential to maintaining good cybersecurity and ensure that only authorized users can gain access to confidential data and resources. While authentication verifies the user, it doesn't govern what a user can do once they've been authenticated. Control over what a user can do is called authorization, and we'll cover that later in this module. Authentication methods. Authentication can be divided into three types: something you know, something you have, and something you are. Something you know includes passwords, PIN numbers, security questions. Something you have includes identity cards, USB keys, computers, cell phones. Something you are includes a fingerprint, facial recognition, retinal scan, other forms of biometric ID. Biometric identification is comprised of physical characteristics that uniquely identify an individual. Single-factor authentication. Single-factor authentication is a system where only one authentication type is used, making it the least secure but simplest method. An example of this system is when the user provides something they know, such as a password, to authenticate. Simple passwords are straightforward to remember but easy for criminals to hack. Complex passwords might seem more secure, but they're hard to remember. It's more likely that someone will write down this type of password, making it much less secure. Another single-factor authentication method is to use something you have. For example, using your cell phone to pay for an item. A tap-to-pay service authenticates the user through something that they have, but doesn't require another verification method. A biometric, something you are, can be used as a single-factor authentication method, but in some common scenarios, it's not necessarily more secure. Consider, for example, when you use a fingerprint to unlock your cell phone. You've probably known instances where the fingerprint might not be readily recognized, so you're given the option to enter a PIN. This can make it easier for someone to guess. In most biometric cases, it's used with another form of authentication. Single-factor authentication is convenient but isn't suitable for a highly secure system. Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is a system where 2 or even 3 authentication types are used. By providing something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are, the system's security is massively increased. For example, in a multi-factor authentication system that uses 2 types of authentications, you might be asked for a password, and then a number is sent to your cell phone. You input this number, proving that you know the password and have your cell phone. This is a common approach when you use multi-factor authentication to access an online bank account. Multi-factor authentication reduces the likelihood that a bad actor will be able to get access to confidential information. As mentioned earlier, biometric authentication is most often used with another method of authentication. Consider the example of a bank that has a secured area where it keeps customers' safety deposit boxes. Before someone can gain access, they're typically required to successfully enter both a password and a fingerprint scan. Multi-factor authentication is an important way users and organizations can improve security. It should be the default approach for authentication. Describe authentication-based attacks. Authentication attacks occur when someone tries to steal another person's credentials. They can then pretend to be that person. Because an objective of these types of attacks is to impersonate a legitimate user, they can also often be referred to as identity attacks. Common attacks include, but are not limited to, brute force attack, dictionary attack, credential stuffing, keylogging, social engineering. Brute force attack. In a brute force attack, a criminal will attempt to gain access simply by trying different usernames and password combinations. Typically, attackers have tools that automate this process by using millions of username and password combinations. Simple passwords with single-factor authentication are vulnerable to brute force attacks. Dictionary attack. A dictionary attack is a form of brute force attack where a dictionary of commonly used words is applied. To prevent dictionary attacks, it's important to use symbols, numbers, and multiple word combinations in a password. Credential stuffing. Credential stuffing is an attack method that takes advantage of the fact that many people use the same username and password across many sites. Attackers will use stolen credentials, usually obtained after a data breach on one site, to attempt to access other areas. Attackers typically use software tools to automate this process. To prevent credential stuffing, it's important not to reuse passwords and to change them regularly, particularly after a security breach. Keylogging. Keylogging involves malicious software that logs keystrokes. Using the keylogger, an attacker can steal username and password combinations, which can then be used for credential stuffing attacks. This is a common attack at internet cafes or anywhere you use a shared computer for access. To prevent keylogging, don't install untrusted software and use reputable virus scanning software. Keylogging isn't limited to just computers. Suppose a bad actor installs a box or device over the card reader and keypad at an ATM. When you insert your card, it passes first through the bad actor's card reader, capturing the card details, before feeding it into the ATM's card reader. Now, when you key in your PIN using the bad actor's keypad, they get your PIN as well. Social engineering. Social engineering involves an attempt to get people to reveal information or complete an action to enable an attack. Most authentication attacks involve exploitation of computers or an attempt to try many credential combinations. Social engineering attacks are different in that they exploit the vulnerabilities of humans. The attacker tries to gain the trust of a legitimate user. They persuade the user to divulge information or take an action that enables them to cause damage or steal information. A number of social engineering techniques can be used for authentication theft, including phishing occurs when an attacker sends a seemingly legitimate email with the objective of having a user reveal their authentication credentials. For example, an email might appear to be from the user's bank. A link opens to what looks like the bank's sign-in page but is actually a fake site. When a user logs in at the fake site, their credentials become available to the attacker. There are several variations of phishing, including spear phishing, which targets specific organizations, businesses, or individuals. Pretexting is a method where an attacker gains the victim's trust and convinces them to divulge secure information. This can then be used to steal their identity. For example, a hacker might call you, pretending to be from the bank, and ask for your password to verify your identity. Another approach uses social media. You might get asked to complete a survey or a quiz where they ask seemingly random and innocent questions that get you to reveal personal facts, or you'll get something that looks fun, like making up the name for your fantasy pop star band by using the name of your first pet and the place you were born. Baiting is a form of attack where the criminal offers a fake reward or prize to encourage the victim to divulge secure information. Other authentication-based attack methods. These are just a few examples of authentication-based attacks. There's always the potential for new attack types, but all of the ones listed here can be prevented by educating people and using multi-factor authentication.